Jean, are we ready to kick it off? Welcome, everybody. Some of you might have screaming kids in the background. I have a screaming cat in the background. So you might hear that when I'm not muted. Welcome back, everybody. Max Page is here with us. He's going to say a few words. I'm going to say a few words. I will introduce our committee before we get started. We have a very robust environmental health and safety committee, and tonight we've got 5 members with us who are running this webinar: Lori Gilbert, Jean Fay, Mike Cerisi, Scott Fulmer, and Kevin Enos. They continue to do some of the most critical work that's coming out of the MTA right now. They have updated information, and Jean will be facilitating tonight. I'm going to turn it over to Max for a few words. I'll say a few words, and then we'll pass it off to Jean.
Great, thanks, Mary. Good evening, MTA members. Good evening, everyone on committee. I'm Max Page. I'm your vice president, and I teach at UMass Amherst when I'm not doing this job. So I just wanted to say a few words about the topic of tonight. But I wanted to start real quickly with sharing just very simple results of a poll that we did, and we're going to be sharing a lot more tomorrow at the big membership meeting tomorrow and Thursday. But I just want to underscore what the poll finds, which is that our public, the general public, is exactly in line with our views in the MTA, which is that they are deeply worried about our students and our educators contracting the COVID and spreading it to the wider community and to their families. The vast majority want what we want, which is a remote start and only moving back into the buildings when they can be assured that health conditions warrant it. And finally, I hope it's no surprise to all the educators, all of us on here, the public trusts you by far more than anyone else on education issues. So we hold a great responsibility. And because we are so in line with what the public believes, we are leading that conversation, and you should feel really good about the MTA and its members taking leadership. And the EHS has been so essential to this work. The guidance that the committee has pulled together has given our members the confidence in arguing for this remote start, in making the case for healthy buildings as a prerequisite for their students and for their fellow members. So that we're going to hear more about the latest work that they have done and can share. And I just want to end by reminding everyone that this applies also to public higher ed. There's a lot of obviously higher ed members on here as well and on the committee. There were 2 important developments this week that came directly out of the work that the EHS has been doing and our members have been guiding. UMass Amherst, where I teach, was welcoming back thousands and thousands of students back onto campus and frankly back into a fairly small town where I live and Jean lives in Amherst. And there was real concern about what that would do for their health and for everyone else's health. And they rolled that back. UMass Amherst, under the pressure from our members about how it did not appear to be a wise and safe choice, they pulled back from that. UMass Lowell just yesterday also decided the same thing, that they would not welcome back students onto campus in dormitories. And that is on one hand a real victory for kind of the real science-based guidance that EHS has been giving to our members and they have been using in their arguments with our employers. That's great. Now, I just want to end on the other half of the sword. The double-edged sword here is that there's a flip side to this. When we secure remote schooling or online education on our campuses, there is a real potential loss of jobs. We have seen how ESPs were laid off in the spring, and there continues to be hundreds, if not close to 2,000 layoffs that are standing. Paras and cafeteria workers and bus drivers and bus monitors and many others, they are threatened when there is not in building schooling. Similarly, in higher ed, maintenance workers and adjunct faculty and many others are being told, well, there's probably not a job for you. So we have got to fight back against that austerity. We have to say that people if they can't be on campus now, we still need them employed. These buildings, our school buildings, our college buildings, are going to reopen, hopefully in months, hopefully not longer. We want them there. We need to keep them employed for themselves, for their campuses, for their schools. for the entire Commonwealth. So let's remember that we're achieving some great health gains in this battle for remote learning and not putting people in danger. And we got to also look out for our fellow union members that they can sustain their livelihoods and their lives. All right, thanks. I'm really looking forward to the rest of this workshop.
Thanks, Max. So I want to start out by saying how proud and excited Max and I both are about the way that we've been working. You know, we heard a lot before the pandemic. Why do I pay dues to MTA? What's my relationship to MTA? I think it's become crystal clear that members who didn't feel connected to MTA before, despite all of the good fights we've had with Question 2 and Fund Our Future, really get it now. This is what it means to be part of a local union and a state affiliate, because we are moving in step, moving with one voice, moving with a set of common demands, and we are fighting and we are winning. You heard the victories at higher ed from Max. We have nearly 100 locals now across the state that have signed on to the spirit of the MTA demands that we refuse to go into the buildings until certain conditions are met, and we will start learning virtually. Some of you who have been, you all have been participating for weeks upon end, a couple of times a week, between the caucus meetings or this virtual summer conference or the environmental health and safety webinars. So you've heard me say some of these things before, but it's worth repeating, because that's when it begins to become deep ingrained in our understanding of what we're doing. We are not just preparing for safety in a pandemic. We are laying the foundation for the schools and colleges we have been saying our communities deserve. We are not ever going to go back to sick buildings. We are not ever going to go back to a curriculum that marginalizes our students. We are never going to go back to the exploitation of adjunct professors. We aren't going back. We're going forward. The work that we do in this campaign is going to put us in new and better circumstances immediately, and it's going to pave the way for the next decade of the fight that we have to do to better the lives of our students, of our members, and to better our schools and our communities. And this fight in front of us right now is also not just about the buildings. What you'll see in a couple of minutes is the latest body from the Environmental Health and Safety Committee. We have been saying to you that there are some conditions that have to be met before we can return. And we've said it very simply, that it's that the buildings have to meet environmental health and safety standards, that there has to be rapid testing and contact tracing, and there has to be a transmission, like a public health benchmark that is set and met. And you've all accepted that. And you've been patient and tolerant while we've been determining at the granular level what that actually means. And we've gotten there. This Environmental Health and Safety Committee has created a document that actually tells you these are the numbers we're looking for air quality, for humidity, for parts per minute of carbon dioxide. This is the level of protective gear that needs to go, and this is how it's differentiated. These are the community transmission rates that we have to see. So we finally have something very concrete for you to negotiate around, and for you to be clear with your school committees, because they're wondering the same thing. Nobody has the answers but the MTA. And what I find really fascinating is a Globe article that came out today, and the headlines are, Baker says 33 communities at moderate or high risk of coronavirus. And one of the quotes he has the audacity to say is, I want to be clear on one point. Regardless of where your community sits, COVID is not going away. Your actions, no matter where you live or where you work, will determine in many respects how this virus spreads. But what he's not saying is that the actions of returning to school in a hybrid will also determine that the virus will spread. It will. So we're not talking safe buildings in and of itself. It's all of the other parts, that the standards that have to be created that work in tandem with buildings for us to decide when it's safe to return. And it has to be a local decision. But I want to encourage you to really challenge yourselves, your members, your families, your school committees to think about the common good. Because if you have met conditions in your local where buildings are safe, but we don't have transmission rates in other parts of the state that are low enough, if we don't have rapid testing and contact tracing across the state, then anywhere that anybody goes, it can follow. We're not safe in isolation of everybody else. Let's not forget that one person in Biogen came from somewhere and brought it to Massachusetts, and it went everywhere. That's how it happened. One person from somewhere brought it somewhere else, and it spread. So we have to be thinking about the common good. We also have to be thinking about equity. In a community where I teach in Concord, we will have the means, because we have new buildings, to probably meet environmental health and safety standards. But what does it do for inequity if kids in Concord can have a different kind of education than kids who don't have the privilege? Plus, we want to redesign education under COVID anyway. We want to make whatever education experience we give to our kids in the next 6 weeks and 6 months the best education it can be. That's in our hands. We can do that. It doesn't matter if we're virtual or in person. We know how to educate, and we know how to be creative and exciting. So this is our moment. This is our moment to stick together, continue to fight until we get the demands that we need, continue to then shift and create a new set of ideas for how we're going to teach and how our students are going to learn in this pandemic. So I welcome you to tonight's meeting again. And we're really excited about the new information that we have to present to you. And I'm going to turn it over to Jean to get us started.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Max. So just a reminder to all our participants, this is being recorded. Everyone will be muted unless you are one of the hosts. And there will be, the chat is disabled for now. It will be opened up in the last 30 minutes, and that's when we're going to be doing a Q&A session. So if you want to put up the first slide. So the real premise of this presentation tonight is about indoor air quality, or IAQ, and why this is so important for us. We're going to be talking a little bit first about the MTA Board of Directors position on reopening. If you haven't seen it, it's up on the screen now. I'm not going to read it out loud because as a participant, I always hate when people read PowerPoints. So if you want to take a few minutes, if you have not seen it before, this is the MTA Board of Directors voted on this position for reopening of our school buildings in the Commonwealth. Why don't you go ahead with the next slide? So what do we know? We know that public education has been underfunded for decades. Our buildings are crumbling down. We had a very successful Fund Our Future campaign, but it's not enough. And now we're in the midst of a pandemic with a highly contagious novel coronavirus that is spread through aerosolization. And that makes ventilation and air quality so important, even under the best of circumstances. And our buildings just are not equipped to handle it. Next slide. So this reminds me of being asked to drive cross country in a vehicle that has not been maintained for decades. You're not going to be allowed to have any bathroom breaks on the way. No stops for snacks or food, no stops to gas up, no air conditioning. There's no activities for the kids. And by the way, you need to fit 25 people into this 6-passenger vehicle. So it's gonna break down before you get to the end of the driveway. That is basically the state of many of our public school buildings in Massachusetts. Next slide, please. This is what we know. And the resource that we use for this is ASHRAE, which is the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers. This is an organization that most school facilities use for their heating and ventilation systems, their HVAC systems. And this comes directly from their resource on reopening of schools. Next slide. So there's some really basic steps that every school district should be doing. This is not a complete list by any means, but there's some really basic steps. We're going to get into them a little bit more, particularly the health and safety committees towards the end. But what I know as a former local president is that maintenance gets deferred on the buildings, particularly the ventilation systems. And I live in a community that is fairly well funded, and we have buildings that leak, we have mold, we have ceiling tiles that fall out, we have filthy filters, we have rodent droppings, and I'm sure many of you have experienced the same thing in your buildings. Next slide. So here are some more things that your district should be doing. And a lot of this is technical information. And what I want you to know is that I'm not an HVAC engineer. I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not a virologist. But what I am is someone who is really passionate about good air quality and why it's important to the health and safety of our students and my colleagues and our colleagues. And so I educated myself, and that's what we do. We're educators. So don't feel overwhelmed by this kind of information. Don't feel that because you're not an HVAC engineer that you can't understand this information. What we're trying to do is assist locals and members so that when they come to the table and have these discussions with their facilities directors and with their superintendents, you have a really good sense of the information and what it pertains to. Next slide. Again, more of a checklist, and we will be putting in the chat at the end a link to all of the resources that the entire Environmental Health and Safety Committee have put together, including a really good tool, which is a checklist for locals to use. And a lot of this information is included in that checklist. Next slide, please. So some really basic ventilation information, what you need to know about what your district should be doing to have good air quality. And it's, for me, it's just appalling almost that we have to almost beg, we have to bargain to get good air quality, to get good ventilation in buildings that not only are we working in, but where there's children. But here we are, and that's what we're doing. All right, next slide. So air filters should all be properly fitted and installed and cleaned. The air exchange should be set at a minimum standard rate, and I am going to defer to our expert on this. So Mike Cerisi, who is, if you don't know him, you should. He is incredible. Mike, can you talk a little bit about air exchange rates and what they should be set at?
Okay, so hello everybody, and so the idea that ASHRAE and others are proposing is that we introduce as much fresh air into a building as possible, that you recirculate air as little as possible. And so this would be expensive for the districts, but the idea is to bring in fresh air and then to exhaust it and to not recirculate air. And the idea is if you do recirculate air, they're saying that the best thing to do is to have, filters, what they call MERV 13 filters, which are heavier filters than what we normally put in our univents or in other systems in our HVA air handling units. And so most of the, so it's really unknown whether your univent can handle a MERV 13 filter or not. Because it makes it more difficult for air to come in, air to get through it, and so the machine has to work harder. The motor has to work harder. Some of the univents that many of you may work with in your classrooms or in your buildings will be incapable of dealing with a MERV 13 filter, and so if that's the case, then what we're saying is that then the air should be purified in some ways. And so all these things are in our proposals. And so they're talking about putting, like I was in Worcester today, and 50% of the buildings were built prior to 1940. And so those buildings don't have HVAC systems in them. They use passive air, they have windows, and they have openings on the top of the doors, and they have openings that pull air out that are passively. And so what they're saying is that in those instances where, at least in Worcester, we're talking about 25 buildings. I mean, and so, and you're talking about a lot of classrooms in 25 buildings. Those systems should have HEPA filters or UV light filtration filters that are air purifiers that are put into these classrooms in order to destabilize the virus or to filter it out. So the idea, like I'm saying, is, you can go to the next slide if you want to, is, yeah. I think that it's all HVAC stuff. Is to keep the relative humidity around between 40 and 60, to use the HEPA filtration services, to keep the carbon dioxide levels. We're actually talking between 600 and 800 parts per million of carbon dioxide. So in a space, in a classroom, either you're going to have carbon dioxide or you're going to have oxygen. And so it's easy to measure carbon dioxide. The Department of Public Health recommends preferably 600 parts per million, and that's what we're recommending, up to 800 parts per million carbon dioxide. We're recommending 20 CFM per person air exchange in the classrooms. And again, this filtration system for recirculated air. We want the humidity in the room, because humidity creates an environment where the virus will attach itself to the the moisture in the room, and it'll drop down to a surface, as opposed to being like Jane was talking in the aerialized or in the air, in entering, you know, into the HVAC system, moving across people into hallways and other things. And so we have special HVAC things, and I'm almost done. Precautions.
No, Mike, you're great.
Thank you.
I could listen to you for hours.
Especially for places like nurse's office or these isolation rooms that are being created. We want to make sure that they are getting fresh air into that room, and that they are getting air exhausted, that it's balanced. And so, you know, we also, if somebody's changing a kid, you know, we want to make sure that, you know, people that are changing, diapering children, you know, they're doing it in a safe area so that the virus does, there is more virus particles in feces, and so they have to have the right kind of personal protective equipment, you know, as well as, you know, tonight we're talking about air exchange stuff. We want the right kind of air exchange for those folks. Buses, you know, our confined spaces, any kind of confined space, we want to make sure. And I've been in a lot of these buildings that, you know, some of the offices really, you know, they need a lot of work. So in Worcester, back to Worcester, they looked at their HVAC system and they figured that they need to upgrade it, $8 million to upgrade the HVAC system. And to buy the filters that they need is $1 million. And so the big systems like Worcester, Boston, Springfield, New Bedford, you know, Fall River, Lawrence, the cities that we have, there's a tremendous amount of money that's going to need to be spent on these HVAC systems, as well as on filtration in rooms where there is no HVAC system because they're old buildings, or where there's inadequate HVAC air exchange. And so, you know, there are a lot of good professionals in some of the districts that are looking at this and coming up with numbers like $8 million, you know, and saying, you know, we're going to need to figure out how to deal with this. What they're doing in Worcester is saying, we're going to go remote, and we can figure we can get this stuff into the buildings by December 30th. And so those are kind of strategies that districts are looking at in order to protect employees' health. So that's.
Thanks, Mike. Okay. So if you look at the slide that's up there right now, request a copy of the district HVAC assessment. So basically and you have the right to do this. We're going to talk about member rights a little bit later on, but you have the right to request for a copy of an assessment of the ventilation systems in every building in your district. As Mike was saying, you want to dilute the air. You want to bring as much fresh air into the building, and you want to exhaust all of the existing air that's in the rooms out. There's something you might hear your facilities directors talking about negative pressure, and that would refer to a room where all of the air is exhausted to the outside. So that would be your health room, definitely your isolation rooms, and your bathrooms. My husband is a contractor, and when I talked to him about negative pressure, he said, well, that's to keep the moisture levels down. Well, yes, that's true, but you also want to exhaust all of the air to the outside. The relative humidity, there's more and more research that's coming out. Mike mentioned the humidity levels and the fact that it makes the virus particles drop down. And there's more and more research that says that, and as we're looking towards the long range, the colder months, that we need to keep the humidity, the relative humidity level between 40 and 60%, which is going to be increasingly difficult as we get into the colder months. The MERV 13, you may have heard this, it's like a hot term, MERV 13, what is that and what does it mean? You can go to the next slide. So what exactly is a MERV 13? So the filters have different numbers to them, and basically it speaks to how tightly it's woven. And the 13 refers to the level of filter, which is the lowest level where virus particles will be filtered out. And that's why you're hearing a lot of talk about MERV 13. I did know what MERV stands for. Mike, can you tell us what that stands for?
No,
Okay.
I can't remember.
I had it written down somewhere. Well, we'll put it in there, but it does stand for something. But anyway, that's what the 13 is for, and that's why you're hearing that number mentioned, because that is the lowest level of filtration or filter that can remove virus particles. I've heard that even a level 16 is obviously is going to be better because it's going to be tight. It's going to be a tighter weave. Now, Mike did mention that there are some systems that cannot take it, because if you think about it, if it's a tighter weave, it's going to restrict the airflow, and there are some systems that can't accommodate that. So if that is the case in your district, then that is when they would want to bring in these portable HEPA filters to the room. They have to do something, and that's why indoor air quality matters. Our buildings are not safe in the condition that they are right now. Next slide. And this comes from the Harvard Healthy Buildings Program. So it's just some more information about portable air cleaners and the importance of not recirculating the air in the buildings. All right, next slide. So a lot of discussion about school nurses, health rooms, and what are we doing about them? As we all know, our school nurses, they see probably 100% of our students at some point during the school week, and they are essential. So one of the things in the flyer is that every school building in the Commonwealth should have a full-time nurse. The fact that we have schools that do not have a full-time nurse on staff, to me, is just incredulous. So that's something that we're demanding, that every building has a full-time school nurse. But what about indoor air quality and the health room and these isolation rooms, which every school district has to designate? You can go ahead to the next slide. So this actually comes from ASHRAE. So this is from the experts, and every school district actually received this. And this is a diagram of what they're recommending a isolation room, health room looks like, and you can see where it says negative. So they're talking about the negative pressure. One of the key aspects to this is an ante-room. So there should be kind of a waiting room before they go into any kind of isolation room. There should also be disposals for biohazard materials and PPE. There's an outside wall. So the recommendation is that the exhaust would be on an exterior wall and definitely not recirculated with any other air in any of the adjacent rooms. Mike, do you want to add anything to this diagram?
I guess the only other thing that I've heard is the nurses will also be doing, they'll be doing triage, so they'll not be mixing the kid who comes in with, or the student that comes in with.
I think we're losing you a little bit, Mike.
They will not be mixing students that come in with broken ankles and triaging them. And they'll be doing more triaging on the phone. And so they won't actually see people that they don't have to see because of potential exposures.
All right, you can go ahead to the next slide. So this is just some basics that your nurse's station and your health room should include. So we talked about the ante-room or the protective equipment room, provisions for biohazard waste. And to be honest, there should be provisions for biohazard waste in all rooms that are being occupied, because we're going to be wearing masks, or we're being asked to wear masks. In classrooms, students are being asked to wear masks, and we're going to be going through multiple masks per day. Students will be going through multiple masks per day, and they need to be disposed of in a proper way. Isolation, for the isolation rooms, the recommendation is that they have a dedicated HVAC or ventilation system. And again, the recommendation is that this air should not be mixing with the air from any other spaces, which we know, again, is not going to happen. Take a good look. Your district's plans that they were supposed to submit, I think by the 14th to DESE, they had to have designated an isolation room in all of the school building. So if you have not seen the blueprint of the buildings in your district, ask for them and look for where that isolation room has been designated.
Yeah. Can I say
Okay,
something?
next slide.
Can I
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I just think, you know, the consideration for isolation rooms on campuses would look very different than isolation rooms in a elementary school, where they might be much larger. In fact, at UMass, they might designate a building to be an isolation building. If a number of people are sick, or if a number of people come up with symptoms, then they could move them into these isolation dorms, you know, until they could actually be taken to the hospital or moved out. So the idea would be for the universities to prepare for, you know, large-scale events taking place very quickly, and having the right medical provisions available to them, as well as the proper PPE and personnel to deal with something like this.
Yeah, and it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when we have an outbreak. I'm sure all of you have been looking, as I have, at the information about the schools in the southern part of the country that have recently reopened, and it's concerning. Some of them, they're open one day and they have an outbreak and they have to close again. They have multiple numbers of staff that test and students that test positive. So we're not equipped by any means. Next slide, please. So Mike talked a little bit about the changing areas. If you or your colleagues work in a district that has an area or a classroom that's designated for students, or a preschool where there's changing or diapering, you want to make sure that these also have exhaust fans. And the recommendation is that these exhaust fans are running 24/7. They typically do not run all the time. But this is something that is, again, coming right from ASHRAE. This is the information that's going to your facilities, that they should be running these exterior exhaust fans 24/7. They're also recommending that the toilets have lids. I'm not sure how that's going to happen, because we're hearing, again, we learn more about this virus daily, if not hourly, that it is spread through aerosolization with fecal matter. So bathrooms are going to be a huge issue. Staggering bathroom use, I work with elementary children, and that is going to be next to impossible. I'm not sure how that's going to work. Again, this is what we're told to work with. Next slide.
Can I just say one other thing on the bathrooms?
Yeah, of course, Mike.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of training that's going to have to happen around the bathrooms, especially now in the K-12s. Well, especially like probably up through the elementaries, where kids can't hang out in the bathrooms anymore. You know, and you know, the idea is these are not safe places to hang out. Once the toilet flushes and the vapors from the flush toilet go go up into the air, then that all can move into the breathing zones.
And again, speaking as someone that works with, and I'm going into my 23rd year working with K to 6th grade students, especially with younger kids, telling them that they can't use the bathroom right now because it's not their turn, is going to prove to be quite interesting. All right, so what can we do? What are your rights to school building maintenance information? What can you do as a member of a local? Go ahead to the next slide. So you have these rights. You have the right to have a healthy and safe building and workplace. You also have the right to request information about the ventilation systems in the buildings where you work, in the buildings in your district, and you have the right to request any information about maintenance or any upgrades that the district has made. You also have the right to bring in your own independent HVAC engineer to do your own independent assessment. And I believe in the Google Drive, there is a list of, Mike, do you know if that list was added of engineers?
There is approved list of DESC engineers that may or may not be in our Google Drive, but people should know we do have a Google Drive that you can all get access to. It provides information on bargaining, safety conditions, resources, things like this, the approved list of inspectors and scientists, industrial hygienists. So that may be on the MTA website. I know that you know that you can have access to a bunch of information on what's going on.
So if you're someone that needs it, we'll get it to you. And I think Sarah just put something in the chat with the Google Drive. All right, Sarah, you can go ahead to the next slide, please. So we want to talk a little bit about local association health and safety committees and district health and safety committees. So the recommendation is that every building in your district should have a health and safety committee. This is one of the most basic forms of organizing that your local can do at the building level. It does not have to be huge. It does not have to be people that know a lot about ventilation systems or know a lot about mold or anything. It just has to be made up of people that care about the health and safety of their colleagues and the students that they educate in their buildings. Next slide. So some of the things that your health and safety committee are going to be doing are improving your working conditions. And the building-based committees are set up or should be set up as a way for employees and staff that work in the building to get information to the local leadership. So you know your building better than anybody, especially if you work in a room that has issues. This is a way for you as an educator to say, you know what, my room has mold, I'm coughing. And when you have a health and safety committee, you can organize around this and improve the conditions. Go ahead to the next slide. So these are just a few of the functions that health and safety committees can do. And I would also like to add that if you are a district that houses an early childhood program or a preschool, it would be really helpful to either get one staff member from that program or to consult with them, because there are different guidelines for early childhood programs around safety conditions. And it can be really useful when you need to do improvements. All right, go ahead to the next slide. So these are just a few of some of the topics that you would want to be talking about with your building health and safety committees, as well as getting ready, if you haven't already started bargaining with your district over your reopening plans. I want you to look down at the second to the bottom bullet point, anxiety and stress. And this is something that often gets overlooked. And we know our kids are going to be stressed as we return to school, but please do not overlook the anxiety and stress that you or your colleagues are going to be experiencing. And we're experiencing it right now. We don't know what school is going to look like. We don't know if we're doing remote or if we're doing a hybrid. We don't know what our expectations are. We don't know what our room is going to look like. And we don't know, no one can assure us if we're going to be safe. So you should expect to be stressed, and you should expect your colleagues to be stressed. So please don't overlook this in your discussions. Also, I want to mention eating in the classroom. Something also that gets overlooked a lot of times. You'll see food in the classroom in IPM. The IPM stands for Integrated Pest Management. Every district is required to have an IPM plan in place. Most districts, their IPM is centered around where food is prepared and served, which would be the cafeterias in most school buildings and the kitchen. What you want to be asking is was the IPM updated, or are you including anything to deal with the issue of an increase in food particles in the classrooms now? So something that gets overlooked and shouldn't. Next slide. This comes from the National Education Association, which we are members of, and this is their language around joint labor management. So a district health and safety committee, which is going to be different than your building-based health and safety committees. Those are local entities, and it's important to have both. So your building-based health and safety committee is a forum for the members. Your joint labor management, your district health and safety committee will include representatives from a wider range of areas. So you should have somebody from facilities, you should have somebody from food service, you should have somebody from maintenance, transportation, and of course, there should be someone from all the bargaining units in your local association. So this is a joint labor management committee to talk about health and safety issues. And this is NEA's language around that. Next slide. And again, cannot stress, not just because we are in a pandemic, but in general, and again, the fact that we have to bargain to have healthy air just is astounding in this day and age, but here we are. So this comes from the EPA website. They actually also have a really good website on school reopenings. The resources will be listed at the end. They have some excellent webinars on indoor air quality. I would highly recommend if you're interested. They are archived, and so you can watch them at your leisure. But we know that air quality, good air quality, is going to affect the performance of kids. It's going to affect the environment for educators and the staff that work in the building. And this is the core of what we do. We educate kids. They can't perform well if the air quality is bad. Next slide. So these are just a few of the things that poor air quality can cause. And I would imagine some of you, if not all of you, have experienced poor air quality in your buildings at some point. Next slide. Some of the short-term and long-term health problems that can come from poor air quality. And often especially if you've worked in the same room for a number of years, you don't really think about it until you start saying to yourself, every time I come in here, I'm coughing, or wow, when I get home from school, I always have a headache, or I'm always sneezing. And that's when you really want to start looking at the air quality in the space where you work. Go ahead to the next slide. All right. So now we're going to be turning the chat feature on for question and answer. So if you have questions for us, you can type them in the chat and we will do our best to answer them.
Can I say something briefly, Jean, about?
Yeah, absolutely, Mike.
So, while people are typing in their questions, is now is really the time. But it's when you go back into the buildings, whenever that happens to be, the culture is going to change, and the focus is going to be around these kinds of issues. And so, forming a health and safety committee now is really a great time to do that, because you can actually affect change in your buildings around, things like, whether it's being cleaned properly, whether there's enough sanitizing fluid around, whether people are social distancing, whether there's enough PPE around. So, you can affect change in the building by getting involved and changing the culture in the building. And the association, the union can do that. But it takes people and for you all to get involved in order to make that.
All right, Mike, we have a question about chemicals and the impact of aerosolized chemicals in cleaning products.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, it's one of the bigger dangers is the disinfectants. Disinfectants are pesticides essentially, and they can be harmful to people that have children and adults that have immune compromised systems, people with asthma. And the thing about the thing about the disinfectants is they stay on the surface for sometimes hours after that are applied. And so a custodian could be doing, frequently touched areas, and a child with asthma might come into contact with that and have adverse health effects. And so one of the things that we're trying to promote is an awareness of what kids have what. And so if, protecting people's rights to confidentiality, and at the same time, making sure the kid that has asthma doesn't get his desk, the surface of his desk disinfected, but cleaned only. And there are some strong cleaners that are out there that can have health effects. And so the children and the people need to communicate with and create a system so that those folks are identified and protected and treated differently because of and accommodated for essentially because of their disabilities.
And this is where it's important to have some input from your preschool educators or early childhood program educators, because there's a different list of what is approved for EEC programs as far as cleaning products and disinfectants.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd like to address with the cleaning products, and this comes directly from EPA, is that students should not be handling them. I know that there are some districts that are saying, oh, we'll have the kids wipe down their desks and disinfect their desks. No, according to the EPA and according to me as a mother and as someone who cares about my students, kids should not be using disinfectants. All right, Mike, there was a question about who at MTA can read these HVAC reports and these assessments that they receive from the district.
Well, I mean, I can look at them, and Sarah Gibson, who is an attorney who does work with one of the attorney groups that we work with, can look at the assessments that are being done and help people interpret the information in the assessments. So
the process would be, if you are a local president, you would put in a request. If you're not a local president, contact your local president and say, hey, have we done this? And let's get the information, let's get it read. All right. The HEPA filters, yes. So if you're in a building that has an HVAC system and a ventilation system, so these portable HEPA filters, they are not supposed to be in place of. They are supposed to be in addition of, to improve the quality of the air that much more. Someone asked about the state minimums for the standards. So the recommendation, if we're talking about the air exchange, it's 20, correct, Mike? Is it 15 or is it 20 parts per million? The cubic, the per minute per occupant.
20. 20 will give you approximately 800 parts per million of carbon dioxide. And that's the level that DPH is always used. So we think it should be a minimum of 20 per person in the building.
And the thing about the CO2 levels, these should be checked on a regular basis. It's not like a one and done where they check them and say, okay, we're good. These should be continually checked. The number of people are going in the room are going to affect it, whether the windows are open or closed. So this is ongoing. All right. I think we addressed this a little bit. If your district is saying that you can't have anything above, they're saying an 8, a MER of 8. What should you do, or what should a local's response be? And you addressed that a little bit when you were talking about Worcester.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where that's where they're saying that if you can't get a filter in the univent above a MER of 8, then you should put an air purifier in the room. And you can use the HEPA air purifier. They have ionization air purifiers, and they have UV light air purifiers. The UV light air purifiers, they have portable ones. If they're installed into the system, you need to be careful about how the installation is done. They should be done by a professional. UV light can be harmful to people. And so they are effective against the virus, though.
All right, I see a question. How do union members responsibly share air quality info with the public so they make informed decisions about sending kids back to school building? So I'll take this one on because when I was a local association president, we had numerous issues with our buildings with leaking ceilings and dirty univents, and pictures say more than words can. So I had my members, the members in the local and the buildings, and again, this speaks to how helpful having these health and safety committees in your buildings will be. Take pictures. And I know where school committee meetings are now handled Zoom. Don't even get me started on why we're talking about returning to classroom when our school boards are discussing it and making decisions remotely because they don't feel safe. But there still is a public comment portion of a school committee where you can submit a public comment. And you have every right to get this information out. I attended school committee meetings where I held up photos of the filthy univent covers, and I held up pictures of rodent droppings in areas where kids could access. So speak up, use your teacher voice, use your educator voice. Let's see, research. Can you comment on research out today that 5-year-old and younger children emit 100 times the aerosolized viral particles from their nasal passages, and what this means for pre-K or K? So again, and anybody else from the Health and Safety Committee chime in on this, but there's recent research that shows that younger children particularly carry more particles of the virus, and so are almost like super spreaders.
And it's also likely that they don't show symptoms, or it's very possible that they're not showing symptoms and don't even ever show symptoms and can be transmitting.
And
but,
go ahead. And this is Scott Fulmer, who is the chair of our committee.
Just to say that one of the reasons why there's not a lot of information about it is because the schools have been shut down and the children have not been exposed, so it has not been studied very well.
All right, we are remote for teaching, but they want teachers to teach from their classrooms. We know the air quality in our schools is not good. How should we handle this situation, or do we have to teach from our classroom? Or if we are told to, thank you. Everything's bargainable. And I'm reminded of the fact that if you're being told to teach from your classroom, you're essentially in an office situation. I know that the governor is saying that public school buildings are exempt from all of these restrictions, but if there is bad air quality in there, no one should be in there. Having good air quality in a building on the long run, it cuts down on absenteeism of staff, it improves production. I can't stress enough the importance of having good air quality and keeping people healthy. The fact that we have to argue with school districts and with the state government over having fresh air to breathe and healthy air is ridiculous. Is there science that says wearing gloves all day is better than washing, sanitizing your hands? Mike, I know how I feel about it. I would say that it's better to be washing your hands than wearing gloves, because anything that you touch with the glove is then going to go on to the next thing that you touch. So hand washing would be the better choice.
I would agree with you.
All right. How would we get access to safety data sheets for students with allergies, or even a list of all cleaning products? So the cleaning products, you have a right to request that in a request for information of what cleaning and disinfecting products are being used. And Mike, I'm going to ask you to chime in on this piece, because there's a difference between cleaning and disinfecting. They're two different things. Right. You want to do the cleaning first, because that's going to remove the grime and the dust, and then disinfecting happens. So Mike, would you agree with that?
I agree with that, yeah.
So you do have the right to receive a list of all of the cleaning products and disinfectants that the district is using. As far as the student allergies, typically the school nurse would have a list or records of any allergies that students would have in the building. And typically the classroom where the student is going to be would be told about whether they have a mold allergy, or I'm concerned about bees. I know we have older school buildings that don't have screens on their windows. We're being told just open the windows. So the school nurse should have the information about allergies. Mm-hmm. And yes, you can request a list of the cleaning products. All right, what say do we have? Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and Kevin can chime in on this, is the material data safety sheets, which talk about the most importantly, ways to treat an exposure to someone that's either sensitized or someone that's overexposed and gets a reaction. The material data safety sheets give you direction. They're supposed to be they're usually in the custodian's office. They may be in the front office, but they're supposed to be on the property.
Mike, with the change to job requirements based on cleaning for COVID, those material data sheets have to be provided to every single member who is asked to do any cleaning whatsoever as part of the OSHA regulations. There's not a question of whether it has to be done or whether they want to do it. That's the law. And the law governs that all material data sheets have to be provided and accessible to every single person who's using them at any way, shape, or form in their daily job.
Mm-hmm.
All right, go ahead, Mike. What do you want to add to that?
The custodians should know where they need to just clean and not disinfect. So they need to know what desks not to disinfect, or if a kid's going to a playground, there's going to be a lot of disinfecting that's going on. And the instructors also need to be aware of this too, so that you can keep people safe.
Talking about disinfecting and cleaning, there are some districts that are talking about purchasing or may have already purchased the plexiglass dividers. And those are something that, and particularly if you're going to have multiple ones in a classroom, these are high touch areas and would need to be disinfected on a very regular basis. So if that's something that your district is saying will protect you, remind them that these need to be cleaned and disinfected. All right, there's a question about mask breaks in classrooms. I wonder about this myself, because why is it that we need to wear a mask to protect ourselves, but then all of a sudden for 30 minutes or during lunch, everything just goes out, just is like, okay, we're good, we'll be fine. The recommendation is the mask breaks should be taken outside, not inside the classroom. I know a lot of districts are saying mask break, 2 mask breaks every certain number of hours, but this should not be happening in the classroom. What is the thinking on community transmission standards? The state hasn't set them, so should the MTA propose them instead? When people say my town is below 2%, what do they mean? Percent positive in tests, or 2 cases per 100,000 in last 2 weeks? Well, if we had a federal plan, a national plan on metrics and testing and contact tracing, I think we would be in a better position than we are right now. Do any of the other committee members want to chime in on metrics and whether there's an MTA proposal, and what should locals do? Because it seems like everyone's using different numbers.
I'll start it if you want. I mean, we've been doing a lot of talking about it. And I think that what we came to consensus on is that we need the information. And so, we're asking the districts to include us in on discussions that happen with the local boards of health, as well as the state board of health, when they're talking about, setting these standards. But as a very basic part, we're saying that the associations should be provided information on all this data, including things like absenteeism in the building, and patterns of absenteeism, patterns of illnesses, and so on and so forth.
All right.
Can I add a little to that, Jean?
Oh yeah, of course. Go ahead.
Just a little bit to say that, we're of course dealing with a broken healthcare system, and these questions shouldn't even really be questions, but it's a very complicated thing to answer. And there in a number of ways, and then you're all aware of them, not the least of which is that the teachers are coming from different communities. So just the transmission rate inside one community doesn't really answer the question about the background transmission rate that might be brought into the building. So the point about that Mike suggested is very critical. We need to be engaged with local health departments constantly and understand the information that they're using, and also to provide them with information that they may not be aware of. Because if we're tuned in with our health and safety committees, we might know things that they're not hearing about not only the transmission, but how the system might not be working, how the information might be breaking down. That's what I just wanted to add.
Thanks, Scott. The next question is, I heard it is useless to do an air quality test this summer since the buildings haven't had people in them for months. True. How often should we be asking for air quality checks? So a building assessment is done to essentially check to make sure everything's functioning. which is a little bit different than an air quality test. So you're going to ask for a building assessment to make sure that the exhaust fans aren't broken, that the univents aren't broken, that filters have been changed. That's why you need a certified engineer, ventilation or HVAC engineer, to come in and do the checks to make sure that things aren't broken. The air quality check is something that's continual, and you can ask for that whenever you want. You can do and again, this is something that should be ongoing.
Yeah, there's a couple checks that you can do in unoccupied spaces. And it's not all exact science, but because you don't have people in the room, and if you have 10 people in a room, it's going to be you're going to get readings that are very different than if you have 30 people in the room. And so those are air exchanges. You know, how many times is the air exchanging in a classroom? EPA says it should be exchanging between 16 and 20 times an hour. The other number that we're looking at is the cubic feet per minute per child of fresh air that's being delivered into the room. The DPH is saying that it should be 20 cubic feet per minute per person in the room.
All right, Sarah just reminded me that we have 2 polls that I completely forgot to do. So the first poll is, they're both about health and safety committees. We just want to get a sense of how many of you know about them, know if your local has them, or have already had them. So Sarah, if you want to put up the first one. And I can't see it on my screen. So Sarah, I don't know if you can time it, give maybe 30
Sure.
seconds.
Yeah, I will let you know.
And apologies I completely forgot those.
So 65% have voted. So we'll give it just another moment or two, and I will display the results. Okay. Wait just maybe 10 more seconds and I'll end the poll. Okay. Okay. Jean, are you able to see the results now?
Yeah, now I can see it. Thank
Okay.
you. So the first question was around your local. So these are the entities that would be building based. So does your local, and it looks like we're in actually good shape. So if you don't know, you know what your job is tomorrow, is to ask someone, do we have one? And if you're someone like me that's interested in health and safety issues, join. If you don't have one, then find out how to get one started. Talk to your local president and say, hey, I'm interested in getting this started. Again, it does not have to be a ton of people. Could you put up that one more time for the second question about the district? Sorry, Sarah. There we go. All right. Do you have a joint? So this would be the district-wide health and safety committee. And we're pretty split, although a lot of people don't know. Again, if you don't know, ask your local president and say, hey, if we don't have one, could we think about getting one started, especially now. It's really important to share, not only share information, but this should be ongoing. This isn't something that a year from now we say, hey, we got through this. This is something that should be ongoing. Good air quality is not something that's just for now. It's ongoing. All right, let me go back to the questions. Let's see. Our district wants to get to 5 air changes per hour. How does that compare to 20? Mike, I'm going to defer to you on that one.
25%. it's not what it should be. It's a problem.
Shouldn't it be 6? If they're using that, shouldn't it be 6 air changes per hour
Yeah, the
minimum?
EPA asked for more than that.
All right, let's see. Do you have any experience with Performex? We have been told that we can just spray it on surfaces and walk away.
I'd say they should read the label. I don't have experience with it, but you should always read the label for any disinfectant, and it'll give you a lot of information in terms of dwell time, as well as whether it should be wiped off or not, whether it needs to be wiped off or not.
Mike, Performex is a multi-purpose disinfectant. It has a spray and a lag time on a desk. It leaves a ton of streaks, and it also leaves a whole bunch of residue. Not particularly the best material to utilize in a classroom setting, especially. I think that was a kindergarten classroom, right? Was that a kindergarten classroom, Jean?
They didn't say.
It wouldn't be our
But,
first choice. I would ask for Virex, HB, or another one of the disinfectants.
All right. Do we know what the acceptable percentage of cases is before closing a building is necessary? Will this be standard across districts? We would hope. And again, it speaks to the metrics and the fact that we don't have any federal leadership.
Right. Those decisions are generally made by the Department of Public Health in the town, as well as the school district. And so that's why we want to be a part of that discussion. That's a proposal that your negotiating committee is making, so that we become a part of those discussions, either with the DPH themselves or in that as a part of one of the three parties.
I'm going to remind everybody that there is information in the Google Drive. That's the Health and Safety Committee information packet that has a list of bargaining issues and bargaining information. All right, if basic cleaning is not occurring, how can we be certain HVAC, IAQ, and cleaning related to COVID is going to occur as listed in a protocol? That's when you would want to ask for cleaning logs. So a list, and again, you have the right to request this information. You would want a list of what cleaning is happening when, what's the frequency. Let's see. Mary has listed some things in the chat about tomorrow, and I'm going to invite Mary back in at the tail end so she can remind people about what those are. Other than portable filters, what upgrades or retrofits can be done as we are unable to use MERV 13? For example, can motors be upgraded or energy recovery ventilators be installed in existing central systems?
Well, the UV light systems can be installed right into the HVAC system. They can be put into ducts, into ductwork. They can be put up by the air handlers. They can be put in a variety of different kinds of places, but yes, they can be installed. There's also microparticle ionization systems. It's an ionization process that can be installed right into the HVAC system. They can be put up on the roof. They don't take up a lot of space in the system, and those are nice. So yeah, they can go both portable as well as right into the ductwork.
All right, is 40 minutes enough time to disinfect 2 classrooms, AM and PM preschool? Will there be lingering chemical exposure? So 40 minutes. I think it would depend on the size of the room and what you have in the room, but I would say no. And we've talked a little bit as a committee about different cohorts using the same classroom and the issues around that. I would say it's probably not the best practice to have different groups of kids using the same room, the same space at different times of the day. The recommendation is that people stay in the same room. Mike, do you want to weigh in on the chemical exposure and how long
I think that
different chemicals might last?
Yeah, you know, is 40 minutes long enough to disinfect 2 rooms? I don't know the answer to that because, I mean, you're supposed to, the frequently touched areas are supposed to be disinfected several times during the day. And then, you know, at the end of the day, there would be a more thorough cleaning taking place. And so the schedule of cleanings, you know, vary. And so the frequently touched areas could be disinfected 2 or 3 times a day. Um, you know, going over the, you know, the doorknobs, you know, the keyboards, other areas you know, in the space that's going to be touched, you know, on a regular basis, should be done several times during the day, just like it is in the you know, the retail stores that you're going into or other places.
So,
Like in a health.
Yeah, Mike, the only thing with retail stores is you don't have a classroom full of preschoolers.
so Jean, can I add to that
touching everything,
for a second?
So
Can I
go
just
ahead,
add to that for a second?
Kevin. Yeah.
So I think the bigger question is, has the individual been trained how to do the cleaning? A huge component of what we're talking about here is the requirement of the district to provide you the instruction to do the cleaning, provide you the chemical data sheets for whatever disinfectant you're going to use, and make sure that you're trained in accordance with OSHA standards. So whoever that is who asked that question, I would go back to my district or whoever is my supervisor and make sure that you're fully vetted in understanding how to do the cleaning. And that's a requirement of the district. We have 100% faith in the fact that the OSHA law protects us when it comes to anything that has to do with the use of chemicals in our classrooms. Disinfectants and cleaners are all chemicals, which means that your district needs to put together a chemical communication program. So something to think about.
Kevin, can you mention again that the disinfectant that you recommended instead of the Performex?
I've used Virex for years and years. It's an extraordinarily good product. It does a great job with almost all viral components. We used it when we had a noro outbreak at one time. We've used it to deal with a lot of different issues that we've had over the years with constant viral outbreaks in our classrooms. It works well. The best thing about it is it's one of those spray and relief disinfectants. So as Mike said earlier, the cleaning is first. I think maybe Eugene, you said it. Cleaning the large components of the desk first, allow that to sit for a moment, spray down the Virex. It's 30 seconds to a minute lag time, and then lightly wipe the material off. Always wear gloves, goggles while you're doing this process. And that's all instructive. That needs to be instructed by your district if you're going to clean your classrooms yourselves.
The question, how safe is it for paras and or related arts teacher to travel between 3 to 5 classrooms a day? That's a really tough question. I'm actually a special ed paraeducator, and that question has come up in my local about what do we do when you're a staff member, when you're an educator that works with different groups, or your primary job is working with different groups of students during the day. I know for my district, and I know the recommendation is, especially for educators who travel between buildings, is that they're not to do that, that you shouldn't travel between buildings. But the recommendation is more that the students stay in one space, and that the aesthetics teachers, so the art, music, computer, come to them instead of the students going to those spaces, which again just speaks to the issue of is this really doable? Is what we're being asked to do something that's feasible, that we can actually do? And you have the right to ask these questions of your districts, and these are the questions that you should be asked in bargaining. All right, and I apologize. A question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kevin.
No, it's a Scott. And you were going to get at what I was going to get at, I think, which was whether this question about how many people in the classroom should be in for a period of time. Yeah, didn't know if that got answered.
No,
Does
it
anybody
looks like
want
we
to
missed
take a
it.
crack at it?
So I don't know. That's a good question. Anyone on the committee want to take that one on?
So if we're utilizing the minimum standard that DESI put out, which is the 3-foot minimum, which none of us agree to, so I'm already establishing that I don't agree to it myself, that would give you a radius of 6 feet across, 3 feet at the 3 feet at the radius. That's 37 square feet in a circle. In a typical classroom, that's 15 by 15. You'd end up with about 9 people in the classroom at a time, roughly. Teacher and 8 students. If you go with our standard, which would be 6 feet, with a 6-foot radius, that's 113 square feet in the circle for each person. 6 feet all the way around, giving them that full circumference of distance. And that's going to be really limiting to almost every classroom, because that puts 3 people in a typical classroom at 15 by 15 classroom. So it's one of the hardest situations that they're going to have to deal with, because we're always looking at this in a linear sense, where it's front to back or side to side, when it's actually a circle around each person. It's not the 6 feet front and back of you, it's the 6 feet around you. So it's just something to consider.
And
Let's see.
and one,
Go ahead,
one
Scott.
little thing there, it also should be tied to the air quality. You know, the number of people in the room should be factored into how well the air is exchanged. So the distancing is part of that question, and the air quality is another part of it.
So there's a question about the protocol for handling student masks while they have a mask break. Where, should we put them in a bag, a lanyard, other? I've seen all kinds of things. I don't know how many of you are on TikTok, but the TikTok videos about what our younger kids are going to be doing with their masks at least provide some comic relief. But I don't know what to say. For disposal of masks in classrooms, there should be biohazard containers provided. As educators, we should not be handling kids' masks, used masks.
Yeah.
And there should be training for staff and students provided by your district on the handling of masks, how to wear them. This should be provided to the students, to the families, and how to dispose of them properly.
Yeah. Kevin probably knows more about this than I do, but one of the things that I have heard about it is you don't want to put a mask into a plastic bag and then put the mask on again, because your mask may have blocked some particles, and then once it gets into the plastic bag, those particles can then circulate around the bag. And so what I've heard is a better place to store it is a paper bag, so that there's some airflow in the bag itself. You don't want to seal them up and then put them back on. Kevin, you have anything to add to that? Nope.
Mike, ideally in any situation during the class day, the students shouldn't be removing the mask completely. They should either drop it down or remove one of the ear wells and allow it to stay where it is. Taking it off and moving it around just gives you more contact with it in different surfaces. For the evening, Mike's absolutely correct. The paper bags are a better situation than the plastic bags, but better than that is to clean the mask each day. There's a number of cleaning protocols on the CDC website. I think Jean, when she developed the last document, put out the CDC website for all the guidance towards the cleaning protocols, and they're all available for you if you look. They're also on the NIH website.
The last slide, which I don't know if that even got shown. We'll put those up. And I think because this is being recorded, the last slide lists the resources that we have, the EPA and the ASHRA. So we've got a couple more questions. Bioesk disinfectant. Kevin, have you heard of that one? It says, how is it our schools will be using it?
It's one of the sprayable disinfectants they use for common touch surfaces. it's a good disinfectant. It doesn't have a lot of miscibility like some of the others that they've utilized. It has a little bit of a history. Again, because it's being utilized in the building and you're being exposed to it, the MSDS logs will be required to have it in place for anyone who comes in contact. As Mike said earlier, that's the reason the MSDS logs are available, because if you come in contact, you want to be able to have the ability to go out and do the first aid if there needs to be any first aid. And with BioEsk, it's mostly eye first aid. Somebody picks a little bit of it, gets in the eye, and it causes an eye irritation. You can look at the MSDS sheet. It's available at the BioEsk website.
All right. There's a question about students changing classes. So these would be in at the secondary level, middle school. So this is a question that you would want to put back on your administration. How are we going to keep our kids safe when they're changing classes? How are we expected to clean their desks? And again, EPA says no students, no children should be using disinfectant. So how then are desks supposed to be cleaned if we have students changing classes? So this would be the question. I would put that back on your administration and have them explain to you how they expect to get this accomplished. And let's see, will CO2 monitoring be useful if we are in hybrid mode given low occupancy? Mike, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think CO2 would be useful. So you're talking about in a situation where there's a limited number of people in the room. I think that it would be valuable information to be able to log the CO2 numbers. And so
again, this is ongoing. This isn't something that we do just at the beginning of the school year or when people re-enter a building and start occupying it. This is something that should be ongoing. And when we're talking about the systems, the recommendation is the entire system runs in occupied mode for a minimum of 1 week prior to anyone occupying it, and that the systems run for 2 hours prior and then 2 hours after the building is occupied.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong. Cambridge is buying CO2 meters for all their buildings. And that's not a bad thing for districts to do, is to buy CO2 meters, to have that a part of your agenda on the Health and Safety Committee. What are the readings used in the CO2 meters, and can they, and how are they being moved about the building? So you make sure you get a cross section of readings of the building and making sure that people are getting enough fresh air on a regular basis.
All right, we've gone a little bit over time. I want to thank all of the participants, and if Mary is still on the call, I want to give her time to thank everybody for joining in and also to give some information about the MTA meetings that are taking place. But I also want to let the participants know and to let everybody know that the MTA's Health and Safety Committee, we are available for you. If you want us to join in a local meeting and answer questions, or we've done regional meetings, or if you have any more questions, we're available to help you. This is a ton of information, and what we're trying to do is to make sure that people don't go into information overload. So we're here to help you, please, and so don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. And with that, if Mary's still on the call, I would like her to, and thank all of you. Thank you for caring about the health and safety of yourself, your colleagues, and your students. So Mary, would you like to say a little bit about what's coming up for the MTA meetings this week? Is Mary still on the call, correct?
She is, but perhaps she's taking a break or multitasking.
Oh, okay. Do you have the information on those two meetings, Sarah?
Let's see here. I can get it very quickly. Yes, there are two. Membership meetings, they're exactly the same. So the idea is that you would sign up for one or the other. As a matter of fact, if you give me just a moment, I'll pull up the link so that you could register. Sorry. So there is one tomorrow from 4 to 5:30. And then there's another one, if tomorrow doesn't work, there's one on Thursday morning at 10 o'clock. Sorry. All right. So yes, Wednesday, tomorrow from 4 to 5:30, or Thursday from 10:30 to 12. And I will, here's the link.
Thanks so much, Sarah.
Link in the chat, sorry.
Okay.
Thank you, Sarah. And I want to thank my fellow committee members for taking the time to answer all these questions that people have. Our committee, I especially want to thank our committee chair, Scott, because he has done an incredible amount of work over the last 5 or 6 months, however long it's been. And we've all worked tirelessly, but Scott has been incredible. So,
well, Jean, that's very kind of you, but I was just going to say thank you so much. This is a great presentation that you did, and all the compliments are flying in and well deserved. It was really, really well organized, very nicely done. Thank you very much.
So thank you to the participants. Again, please reach out to us. We are here to help. We'll come out, we'll join in any of your Zoom meetings. If you want your local to meet, and go out there and start your health and safety committees if you haven't already.
Right.
So thank you, everyone. Have a great night. Stay tuned. There's always going to be more information coming.
Thank you.
Nice job. Jean.
Great info. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.